All right, yeah, so we'll go ahead and start. First, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. My name is Sunny. I'm one of the officers in the Blockchain at Berkeley organization. I've been working with, I got into cryptocurrencies last year, fall, my first semester, and so I taught this decal along with the two other facilitators who are Max and Philip. Both of them couldn't be here today because they're at a conference, at a security conference at Stanford today. But the three main facilitators for the course will be myself, Max, and Philip. But throughout the course, we'll have a lot of guest lecturers, including today. John will be guest lecturing with me today.
Yeah, hi everybody. John Allen. I'm head of consulting for Blockchain at Berkeley. We'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. Been obsessed with crypto, Bitcoin for like around 4 years. Got lucky enough to help start Blockchain at Berkeley once I got here. And I'll be guest lecturing for this.
Yeah, so really quickly before we begin, we have to do our obligatory spiel for Blockchain at Berkeley. So yeah, Blockchain at Berkeley, it's the organization that's running the course. We are a student org with about 60 members or so. We do a lot of different things with cryptocurrencies and a lot of other non-currency blockchain uses. We have three main arms: the education arm, which runs this decal, as well as a number of workshops that we teach on like Ethereum development. We have a consultancy that consults for a number of large companies such as Airbus, Ford, City Innovate, on how to implement blockchain solutions into their platforms. And finally, we have an R&D division, which does some cutting-edge research with like some grad students and professors on campus, as well as more like individual projects where on the application level. So that's a little bit about us. We started off before as we were originally founded as the Bitcoin Association 2 years ago, but as the industry changed, so did we. About 6 months ago, we rebranded ourselves to Blockchain at Berkeley, and that's where we are today. But we'll go into this lecture. Will actually go quite a bit into like the reasons behind the rebrand. This was the whole org chart. On today's lecture, we're going to be covering the history of Bitcoin, so that way you can understand the backgrounds and motivations of the people running the industry today. Really quick, do we want the lights off or on? On.
Who wants them on? Raise your hand.
Off?
So off it is.
Off it is. I don't know, somewhere over there, I think. Okay, but anyways, so today's lecture, like I said, we'll be going into some very, very basic concepts of Bitcoin, as well as then outlining the history. And I must say that today's lecture is probably not very representative of the course in general. The course will end up becoming a lot more technical than today will be, which is why I'm requiring people to attend the first two lectures in order to see if they're really interested in the course, because the next week we'll be jumping right into the technical side of things. Let's go ahead and begin. So first off, just some very, very basic Bitcoin concepts. I'm just going to be explaining what Bitcoin is rather than how it works. So the name of this course is the Cryptocurrency Decal, and basically a cryptocurrency is a digital currency that uses like cryptography and encryption techniques to regulate the generation of units as well as the transfer of funds. And the whole idea is it created a way to decentralize currency, take out any central bank, any government. No one owns. There's no central authority in this process. And Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. It was the first one, and it is the flagship cryptocurrency, which is why we kind of in this course, we will be focusing pretty heavily on Bitcoin specifically, but we will be going into a whole bunch of other currencies as well, such as Ethereum, Dash, Monero, Zcash. There's a whole bunch of other currencies that we'll be going into, as well as a lot of non-currency blockchain applications as well. And then also Bitcoin is when it has two meanings. If it's uppercase, we're talking about the protocol, the software, and the community. And when it's lowercase, we're talking about the unit, like the actual, like the virtual Bitcoin that you're spending. This is kind of, I just want to make that clear because for other things like Ethereum, for example, like it has two different names. Ethereum is the name of the software, while Ether is the name of the currency with the unit. So why is Bitcoin important? It accomplishes three main things. These are like all some like really big buzzwords you're going to hear throughout the class, right? So it decentralized, consensus, and trustless. It's decentralized consensus because it operates with no central point of failure or control, and it's trustless, meaning that you don't have to trust anyone else in order to make your transactions. And consensus, as applied to Bitcoin, is that the network of nodes agrees on the transaction history. We'll be going a bit more into this a little bit in this lecture and more in the next one, how consensus is actually reached, for example. But so what are some of the innovative properties of Bitcoin? It's an open financial network. It's pseudonymous. So we'll be going later on into what's the difference between anonymous and pseudonymous. It's borderless, which means it's really good for remittances. It's a piece of software the government can't really stop it from like transcending borders. It's censorship resistant and immutable, mostly because we'll also be going into how it's not really censorship resistance because there's some very interesting like game theory attacks that you can use to like you can use to censor Bitcoin, as well as programmable money. This is like a little bit of a contention because like honestly most money is programmable. Like we all use Venmo, that's also programmable money, but Bitcoin's more of an open, cheaper programmable money system. So in theory, you could go ahead and write your own payment platform and have no transaction fees, but that takes a lot of work. And then all the existing solutions, such as like Square or PayPal, they're going to charge you. So Bitcoin is often a cheaper alternative. And so here we just have
What exactly is a remittance?
A remittance is when people like who go abroad and work in other countries, they send money back to their home country, often to help their family or stuff like that. And the thing is, a lot of countries have like capital controls, like placing limits on how much capital can leave their borders. So Bitcoin is a good way to circumvent those. In that chart we have a few of the differences between gold, fiat currencies like the US dollar, and cryptocurrencies. Some of the use cases, like I mentioned, were remittances, digital goods, machine-to-machine payments, and IoT. Because Bitcoin is extremely divisible, you can send like hundredths of a cent, which makes it really good for micropayments, as well as like machine-to-machine payments when we're dealing with like large networks of IoT devices. It's a currency for anonymous networks, such as like most of the Tor community uses it. You can use it as a normal currency to buy and sell goods, like as a normal person would. And some really cool stuff like proof of existence, like you can like I said, Bitcoin blockchain is pretty immutable, so you can like store data on there and it'll probably never be changed. So some very basic jargon. Transactions are basically when you transfer Bitcoin from from input address to an output address. An address is basically, think of it as an account. It's not really. Next lecture we'll be going into why it's not really. You can't think of it just as an account. But for now, let's just do that. Blocks are then a timestamped collection of transactions. So a new block is created every 10 minutes, and a block basically just contains the data for all the new transactions that were done in the last 10 minutes. A miner is someone who validates those transactions and puts them in blocks. Basically, the idea is you want to validate every single transaction to make sure each transaction is real and was actually created by the person whose account it's coming from, the person whose account it is. And this validation process requires a lot of computing power in order to improve its security. And that in return, miners get a little bit of a reward in order to compensate them for verifying these transactions. And finally, the blockchain is basically the set of all the blocks over like the entire course of Bitcoin, just in a string, basically, like all the sets of 10-minute transactions put one after another. And one important thing to remember is how Bitcoin works is the community has agreed that the longest chain is the true chain. So let's say two miners come up with the same block at the same time. Whoever has the longer one gets is the real chain. And where does Bitcoin get its value? Just like any other, or just like any currency, actually, it has value because people thinks it has value. Like the U.S. dollar is a piece of paper, but we think it has value. Gold is just a piece of rock, but we think it has value. Yes.
Can you repeat your point about how the longest chain is the long chain?
Sure. So what happens is every time you could technically anyone can go ahead and fork the Bitcoin blockchain, right, and start working on what we call side chains, right? So, but what will happen is if the majority of miners are still working on the original blockchain, they'll be finding blocks for that much faster, which will make that one longer. So the majority of the community will accept this longer chain as the real blockchain. And so you're just going to be working on like something pointless that no one else is actually going to accept, if that makes sense. Yeah. All right, so a bit of a lecture overview, how we're going to go through the history, is we're going to do it through a few representative stories, some very like periods of Bitcoin history. So first off is pre-Bitcoin, which is before 2009, which is on libertarian dreams and ideals. So Bitcoin is very fundamentally rooted in like a lot of libertarian ideology. Basically, in libertarianism, for those who don't know, is a political ideology advocating non-aggression principle and the laissez-faire government. And cryptography is a science of secure and communication in the presence of third parties. And so we had this movement in the 80s and 90s where as technology was increasing, a lot of people were very scared as to how much power it would give the government. So there was this group of people, community called the Cypherpunks, who were people who wanted to use technology to fight the increase in like things like government surveillance and government oversight into the free market. And so they used cryptography techniques that were being developed around the same time in order to do so. So the cypherpunks were like extremely obsessed with how technology would change the relationship between the individual and state. And so they wanted to know how to use cryptography to help people protect their personal information and maintain their privacy from the government. One of the very famous examples of a pre-Bitcoin cryptocurrency that was created was called DigiCash. It was created by this guy, David Chaum, who's this like really intelligent but like hippie-looking guy from Israel. And so he saw that he used something called public and private key cryptography, which we'll be going explaining a lot more in future lectures, in order to allow verified transactions between people. But the biggest problem with DigiCash was that it was centralized, and David Chaum's company needed to confirm every single transaction. And what happened was Chaum's company eventually went bankrupt, and the entire DigiCash system went down. And what people learned from this was, hey, if we want to create a true digital currency that's like independent of the government, it has to be decentralized. Because if we have one person control it, that's a central point of failure. And if they're malicious or they go bankrupt, the entire system goes down. And that's not a good thing. So in comes this guy named Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi Nakamoto is just a pseudonym. No one knows who he actually is. There was some story that it's this guy, but it's actually not. At least he claims it's not. But yeah, so what he did was he is the anonymous creator of Bitcoin who wrote a 9-page white paper and basically brilliantly combined a lot of the previous advances such as public-private key cryptography, elliptic curve, and he created this idea called proof of work, which was basically a way to achieve decentralization. We'll be going into that once again next lecture. But so yeah, what he did was he created, and then he published this online and started development on it, and within a year, the first Genesis block was mined on January 3rd, 2009. And what's very interesting is that in every Bitcoin block, there's something called an operator, which is basically a small piece of area where whichever miner created that block could insert a little piece of text that they want to insert there. And so the first Genesis block actually referenced a Times of London newspaper referencing where the Chancellor bailed out a large number of banks. And so this really shows towards the libertarian roots of Bitcoin. What's really interesting is that John, a few weeks ago, actually, these newspapers are really rare because no one's going to keep a newspaper from that long ago. But after this, it became really popular. And so John brokered a transaction for someone to buy these one of these articles for $10,000. But yeah, so the first transaction was created by Hal Finney. But the thing is, for the next year and a half or so, everyone participating in this Bitcoin network was just a hobby. They're like, oh, this is a pretty cool thing. Yeah, let's just do it. I mean, we're not earning anything off of it. But then the pivotal moment came on May 21st, 2010, when Laszlo Hajek purchased $25 worth of pizza with 10,000 Bitcoin. He basically posted on a forum, as a joke, hey, I'll give someone 10,000 Bitcoin if you order me a pizza to my house. And so someone took him up on the offer. And so this was the first ever Bitcoin transaction for a tangible asset. And that's very important because it validated the use of Bitcoin as an actual currency for the usage of buying physical goods. And so the joke amongst people is that that 10,000 Bitcoins would have now been worth $9 million. So it's the $9 million pizza. What's interesting is last semester when I taught it was the $6 million pizza. So Bitcoin prices are going up. Then we enter this period of scandals, hacks, and illegal activity. I'll just quickly run through some of the very big headlines that everyone knows about. First is Mt. Gox. Mt. Gox was one of the largest Bitcoin exchanges, and it was handling up to about 70% of Bitcoin transactions. And in June 2011, it suffered a major breach of security that resulted in fraudulent trading and required the site to be shut down for 7 days. This was just signs of upcoming trouble. Then in 2014, Mt. Gox lost a large, about 750,000 Bitcoins in theft that was going unaccounted for years, which just really goes to show how bad Mt. Gox's security was. And this isn't don't think of this as a fault with Bitcoin. Bitcoin security was never hacked. It was purely Mt. Gox's poor management that caused this to happen. But in 2014, eventually Mt. Gox declared bankruptcy, and this really hurt the Bitcoin, the public sentiment about it for a while. Another thing that's very well known is drugs. So, on February 2011, Silk Road opened for business. Silk Road was a Bitcoin marketplace that was designed for drug deals and called eBay of drugs. And basically, Bitcoin and Silk Road were almost considered so intertwined. Such a large number of Bitcoin usage was for Silk Road. Almost every merchant on Silk Road only accepted Bitcoin. Their fates were pretty intertwined. So when the FBI shut down Silk Road, Bitcoin also suffered a major hit right there. And Ross Ulbricht, the founder of Silk Road, is now founder of Silk Road, maybe. There's some contention about that. But he's currently serving a life sentence without possibility of parole. So don't do drugs or sell them either.
Can I get a question, son?
Yes.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
It was how did they know the exact amount of Bitcoin lost? A few slides ago, it was 755,408 Bitcoins.
So that's actually really interesting. It's basically been from what individuals said they had in their accounts. There's a lot of different recollections or what would happen, a lot of different ideas. Some people even think he was running a fractional reserve system, and so he actually didn't actually have all of those. He claimed to have them, but when it came time, the price went up, people went to sell them, then everything fell apart. There's actually an extra reading. I'll go into it a little bit more, but that's a really good question, actually.
So yeah, it was this time period where especially fueled by a lot of speculation from China, as well as Mt. Gox had a there were two bots called. One of them was called the Willy bot, which engaged in a lot of speculative trading. It's commonly thought that these bots were created by Mt. Gox, but it's never been proven. But one of the optional readings for today is about that. Completely side note, just want to bring this up. Mt. Gox was actually a Magic the Gathering organization. Mt. Gox stands for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange, but then somehow they got into Bitcoin. Yeah. Completely off the side. Okay. So yeah, part of this bubble was because of those two things. And this is over the period of 1 month where Bitcoin's price quickly rose from 200 to over 1,000. And it was because of this new hype that came around it. Bitcoin started to attract a lot of attention. So some of the big headlines from the time were about Mt. Gox. People thought that they found the Bitcoin inventor, which like I said, he claims he's not. And people were like very still speculative about the price, like saying like, oh, it's gonna hit 10,000 and stuff. And we started to get a lot of merchant acceptance from big names like PayPal and Bitcoin, as well as stuff like porn.com, which is surprisingly a very big boost to the Bitcoin system, as well as you could do stuff like there's a service called Shit Express, which would allow you to deliver horse manure to some of your friends or enemies. Yeah. Then in 2013, 2014, we started to see the rise of venture-funded Bitcoin startups. One of the biggest companies that's really good to track the interest in the Bitcoin ecosystem as a whole is to look at Coinbase. A lot of Bitcoin enthusiasts don't really like Coinbase because a lot of people go into this because they say screw the banks and stuff. But Coinbase essentially just created a bank. But regardless, though, it was founded in June 2012 after going through Y Combinator. And as we can see, as hype for Bitcoin increased, their funding rounds got higher and higher. And this just really shows why the increase in hype for the industry. And what's actually very interesting is July 2015, they actually didn't need to do a Series C. They had enough funding, but they thought that the Bitcoin hype was starting to die down. So they decided just to have a Series C just to keep the hype going. And they were pretty right that the hype in 2015 did actually start to decline pretty heavily. But we'll go into that a little bit. Some other big venture startups are 21, BitPay. One important name that we have to I'm sure a lot of people have heard of A16Z. And A16Z are Andresen Horowitz. Andresen is one of the biggest proponents of blockchain and Bitcoin tech, and he's obviously a very influential member in the tech industry. And so A16Z is the funder of a lot of these startups such as Coinbase and 21. And they even created something called Blockstream, which is basically a research department that basically just helps push forward the industry because they've done so much investment into the Bitcoin blockchain industry that they don't want to lose their investment. So they've created a research group just to push the industry forward. They're actually the ones who, there's the Bitcoin core developers. They're the ones who actually pay them. But John will be going into that in the second half of the lecture. And then we have a bunch of other big companies. These are some of the big names that you'll be hearing throughout the course. As Coinbase predicted, the price actually began to slowly plummet as it was in fact a bubble. Like I said, a lot of it was done based on speculation. And from the course of 2014 to end of 2016, the price to mid 2016, the price slowly declined over time. And what's very interesting is you can notice the size of the Bitcoin Association Blockchain at Berkeley Club very closely models hype and the price of Bitcoin. So when we started, Bitcoin was pretty high in the 800s. Then when I joined, which was fall 2015, Bitcoin was at like one of its lowest points, and the club was about 6 people. And now that Bitcoin is like up again, the club has like 60 people. So go figure. So yeah, and now we're going to talk about what happened after this. Bitcoin, what happened 2015 onwards, and John will be talking about that. How do I do this? Thank you.
All right, how's everybody holding up? Still awake? All right, let's do this. Okay, like Sonny said, I'm going to talk about Ethereum blowing up in multiple ways. I'll get into that a little bit, what that means. Bitcoin bouncing back, if you've been paying attention to price, it definitely has. And then kind of the rise of this enterprise blockchain. As far as Ethereum, Sonny mentioned it before, it's the second biggest market cap cryptocurrency currently. You can think of Bitcoin as kind of coin-centric. It's very much based on this coin transferring to and from. Whereas Ethereum uses its coin Ether as more of a fuel. That's kind of how you can kind of think of it. It's not necessarily coin-centric. It's like a smart contract platform. And it's kind of a decentralized computer. And they use this Ethereum as fuel in order to drive these smart contracts. It's really interesting because anything that you could do in a centralized way, you can now do in a decentralized way because it's Turing complete. So given enough resources, you can execute any code you want on it if you're willing to pay the Ether cost to run it. And you can look at the history. In 2013, it was developed by Vitalik Buterin, absolutely insanely smart, young, intelligent guy. What's going on, dear?
Can you elaborate on what Turing complete means?
Yeah, Turing complete, basically, like I said, any code that you write can be executed on it. It's basically like a computer. Whereas you have Bitcoin, it's an extremely simple protocol. Ethereum is extremely complex in that it can run anything you can really throw at it. However, it is very expensive and resource intensive because everything that you post with your smart contract is going to be executed on every single individual who is mining in that network. So you usually want to be very efficient. It's not something you're just going to pay tons and tons of money to run whatever you want just for fun. That's a little more into the game theory. We'll get into that later though. In 2014, they had their crowd sale where they sold this Ether and tried to raise some funds. And then in 2015, their blockchain was launched. The value of the Ethereum tokens was worth more than $1 billion in May of 2016, and this was very significant because it was the first time that another cryptocurrency had broached that $1 billion market cap, and so it was like a very big deal because most altcoins were worth like extremely little, but this time it had breached 1 billion, so it started to become seen as something that was just as interesting as Bitcoin.
What are Ethereum tokens?
What are Ethereum tokens?
Yeah.
They're, like I said, they're called Ether.
So it's a different form of cryptocurrency?
No, so it's very similar. It's kind of based on we'll get into it more, like what the cool cryptographic things that were like discovered kind of by Bitcoin. But it's not, no.
Yes, it is a completely different currency though. It's like independent of Bitcoin.
Yeah, like I said, like Bitcoin is about kind of Bitcoin. It's very coin-centric. Whereas Ethereum, what they're kind of the new flavor that they added to it was smart contracts. They use their Ether kind of as the fuel because like we'll get into the game theory a little bit later, but you have to be able to control who's executing what on the on the network, or else people just flood it with just very busy work, kind of denial of service attacks. And then 2016, what's very interesting about Ethereum is that because of this complex code and you can write all these very interesting things and have this decentralized network, they had things called DAO, which is a decentralized autonomous organization, which is very interesting because you can actually have a crowdsourced, like where people can collect a bunch of money and put it into an organization, and they could very democratically vote on how they want those funds spent. This was supposed to be the flagship of the currency. It was this huge deal. It was going to be a democratic organization, but there was a flaw in the code. Not a flaw in the Ethereum protocol, but a flaw in the code that was written on top of it called the DAO. And it allowed a bunch of parent DAOs. I won't get into the complex nature, but basically 10% of the entire market cap was stolen. So 10% of all Ether in existence were stolen. And there was a significant disagreement on how this should be settled. The main group basically wanted to roll the protocol back. They wanted to roll the blockchain back and to say, act like this has never happened. And another smaller group, obviously, kind of really believed in the immutability. They were more the libertarian side who were like, no, if we have the blockchain be immutable or changeable, then it kind of goes against everything we believe in. So this is actually what Sunny was kind of talking about, where you have this network who's split. It was a hard fork because you can't have two worlds that exist in which the hack did happen and a hack did not happen. So there's currently like Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, which they're kind of running. Ethereum is kind of the longer chain, like Sunny was talking about. There's actually a smaller chain called Ethereum Classic that's still running. Very, very interesting. We'll get into that a little bit later on.
Once again, just remember that the DAO, like the security problem, wasn't with the Ethereum platform. It was really more with the internal security of the DAO.
Yep. And then so we talked about the rise, kind of Bitcoin bouncing back. If you've been paying attention to the price, it's pretty insane. You can see it's kind of this nice U shape. We actually had a spike like a couple months ago where it like got very close to the 1163 high that it reached a couple of years ago. There are a lot of reasons for this. A lot of them are political, and a lot of them are economic. A lot of those two are also intertwined. They're both political and economic. But you can see things like Brexit, like Greece. Before that, you have Trump. You have India's war on cash, where they banned the 500 rupee and the 1,000 rupee, and it effectively limited their cash supply by 80%. Like just a lot of volatility in general. You have circumventing capital controls, which Sunny touched on briefly. You have China really like stringent on how much cash you can get out of the country, and a lot of individuals want to circumvent that. They see Bitcoin as basically a rail to get us outside those countries' controls. And then you just have a general instability in the market. The thing that's been really interesting is this kind of mental shift. You originally had the pizza where it was like all of a sudden digital currency is worth money. Now you've had the shift where people see Bitcoin as a hedge. They're kind of relating it like to precious metals, in which it's inversely, it might be volatile, but it's inversely volatile compared to the rest of the market. So while the market goes down, while the market is struggling, these things like gold, like commodities are starting to do very well, and Bitcoin's kind of being seen as that kind of store of value, that safe haven against the unknown. And then this is the enterprise blockchains. Yeah.
Just related to the correlation that you mentioned, did you have a chance to look at the actual correlation between market movements of the Bitcoin and price? Or like Ethereum?
With Ethereum or Bitcoin?
With either.
So like both of them are actually like doing extremely well. Like I said, when the market like downturns, when there's things like Cyprus, Greece, when there's like kind of this bailout, like lack of trust in the banks, they're actually doing extremely well. Like I don't have a graph, but there are some like very interesting graphs. Like one of the bigger factors is also how China's doing with the devaluation of the yuan. That's like a little more closely correlated. But yeah, that kind of answer your question a little bit, yeah. But you can definitely look it up. There's some interesting correlations, but it should be interesting to see how it goes because it is such a small market cap. So obviously it's tentative to say it's directly correlated. But so this is the enterprise blockchains, blockchain kind of interest in the banks. So it was very interesting. You had this huge pivot that banks didn't want to be related to anything involving Bitcoin. Like Sunny was talking about, you have a lot of like drugs, a lot of scandal, a lot of bad things, and so it was just very bad for their brand to kind of get involved with that. So they really pivoted away from not Bitcoin, but blockchain. The underlying technology was truly interesting. That was what was revolutionary. That's what they could kind of adopt, and that was okay. But it was kind of not how they wanted to adopt it because it was open, because it was public, because they didn't control it. They weren't the mining majority. They didn't know what would happen. So they really wanted to make these permission ledgers or private blockchains, except they were extremely different from things like Bitcoin or things like Ethereum. They were not open, they're not trustless, and they really have no economic incentives like Bitcoin. Like I said again, they really separated this blockchain away from Bitcoin. They wanted to internalize and make it their own. There's kind of a bad thing about this is it doesn't really use consensus. It's kind of like glorified public key cryptography. It doesn't really have that proof of work, that openness, that ability to unify people, to have trust in a trustless environment. It's kind of like a glorified database, if you will. I mean, we'll go a lot more into it in Lecture 6 in the alternative consensus and enterprise blockchain, but it really is an interesting kind of pivot. You have companies like R3CEV. It was a consortium of banks. Think like giant bulge bracket banks. I think it was like over 50 banks where wanted to collaborate and come up with this unified blockchain. But it was really difficult because you have all these banks that have so much money riding on this and so many secrets that they wanted to have a consortium. They wanted to agree and come up with a solution. They realized that blockchain could benefit them and it could also be detrimental to them if they didn't adopt it. But at the same time, they didn't really want to work with each other. They didn't want to really share information. So you've had this really interesting kind of pull and tug, if you will, where banks have wanted to work together, but a lot of them have like lost confidence and haven't wanted to donate money. So they've dropped out and actually started their own. It's very interesting. I compare it a lot to like the intranet versus the internet, where you have these walled gardens where people want to develop their own protocols and keep it in-house and don't want to share it. But I think like it's really beneficial when everyone starts collaborating, but that's just really hasn't happened, even though tons of money has been poured into things like R3. Another one that I'll briefly touch on is this digital asset holdings. It's founded by Blythe Masters. If you paid attention to the 2008 crisis at all, you might recognize her name. She invented the credited default swap. So it should be really interesting to see what kind of fun things she has planned for the blockchain space. Hopefully nothing that terrible. I think kind of the best representation though to this like pivot and how the like really mentality and sentiment within industry has changed is from Jamie Dimon. He's CEO of JPMorgan Chase. In January 2014, he said it's a terrible store of value. It could be replicated over and over. Just immediately dismisses it, but he clearly just doesn't fundamentally understand what is so cool about it or just even how it works. And then in October of 2014, he says, Bitcoin developers are going to try and eat our lunch, and that's fine. That's called competition, and we'll be competing. So it's very interesting. He pivoted in such a short time to actually giving it legitimacy, like giving it, like realizing that they're competing, that they're in the same space as him. And in 2015, he says, virtual currency, where it's called Bitcoin versus the US dollar, that's going to be stopped. No government will ever support a virtual currency that goes around borders and doesn't have the same controls. It's not going to happen. You can see that he's kind of threatened. He just really doesn't like it. He doesn't want to be involved with it, doesn't think it's going to happen. And then finally, in 2016, he says the blockchain is a technology which we've been studying, and yes, it's real, which is good to know. I wasn't sure if it was. It could probably reduce the cost of real applications in certain things. If it proves to be cheap and secure, it will be adopted for a whole bunch of stuff. As you see, he's separated this Bitcoin to blockchain. All of a sudden, it's blockchain. It is a technology. It does exist. It's very interesting, and now his company is going to use it. If it creates efficiencies, if it saves money, then all of a sudden it's going to be a JPMorgan Chase technology. Very, very interesting transition. How we've gone from this Israeli crypto hippie wizard to JPMorgan Chase in just a few short years. It really is crazy how fast this has progressed. I'm going to get a little bit into the Bitcoin community. I could talk about this for hours, but I'm trying to kind of like pick and choose the pertinent things. As with any new technology, it really matters kind of how the community interacts with it and who's developing on it and how it progresses. So I think it's very pertinent. This is actually an ad that if you go on Reddit Bitcoin, you're going to see. It was created forever ago. I don't even know by who, but somebody who's probably an early adopter and is filthy rich is paid to keep it as a paid advertisement and probably forever because it's hilarious, but it's magic internet money. Pretty famous image. So as far as where the community exists, like Reddit Bitcoin and Reddit BTC, those are good places to kind of go. Bitcoin Talk, like Sonny was talking about the broker deal I did for the newspaper for $10,000, that was on Bitcoin Talk. It's probably the largest kind of like Bitcoin community, Bitcoin marketplace that you're going to find on the internet. Satoshi still has some posts there you can go back and read. It's very cool. A lot of dialogue happens there and a lot of different levels of engagement. Bitcoin meetups, conferences, and hopefully, like we were talking about blockchain at Berkeley, we're really trying to make a hub here. We're really trying to make people engage, like have people engage, and kind of have it be a forum of like dialogue and development. Yeah, just had to pitch that club one more time. No big deal. All right. Here's an example. It's just a bunch of companies in the space. As you see, there's like financial services, wallets, mining, exchanges. It really touches on so many different facets. It's very interesting. That being said, a lot of these are startups. Probably over half of these are gone, they've failed, or some of them have pivoted completely, changed their name, gone into different spaces, and probably I would say a quarter of them might end up in jail. It's very interesting when you work. Yeah, so it's great, man. When you work with finance and you work with money and you're kind of working in the gray area and things that aren't necessarily like fiat, like that are backed by the government, then bad things can happen if you don't play by the rules exactly and get caught up in something. So it's very interesting. Space develops so quickly. This is Bitcoin Core. You can think of it as like the de facto rulebook of Bitcoin. It's open source software, and it's kind of developed by these Bitcoin improvement proposals. That's how things are changed. And I'll go a little bit more into the core developers. One thing that's important to mention, though, is that it is open source software, but it is also publicly developed. Just because the core developers put it out doesn't mean that the miners necessarily have to accept it. If they put out something bad, or for some reason the miners think that it's in their best interest to adopt a completely other software, say I type up something really cool and they think it's amazing, then they're going to start running John's software, and that's going to become Bitcoin. So kind of whatever the network adopts, whatever the majority of the network adopts, then that is Bitcoin. So it's been very interesting. I'll get into a little bit of the disagreements and how Bitcoin should progress and how that's kind of changed the development a little bit later. You can see on the right, it's kind of a list of the Bitcoin Core contributors. To date, almost 400 people have contributed to Bitcoin Core. It's fairly decentralized in nature. 43 contributed to the most recent release, which was 13.1. It had segregated witness and a few other things we might probably talk about a little bit later. But there are 3 maintainers who have commit access. When you have something with a $15 billion market cap, you don't really want anyone to have access of actually, like merging branches and deciding what commits get put into it. But you can look at the top. There are some individuals who just have tons of commits who have contributed significantly to this project, and it drops off significantly. You can see that halfway down, some people only have 18 or 10. So while they are contributing, there definitely is kind of a small centralization of people who actually know enough and are involved enough and put in the time to develop this software significantly. We talked about the Bitcoin improvement proposal. Basically, developers publicly publish the proposal, and then the miners vote on it. This one gives the example of 55%, but the most recent one, in order to have segregated witness activated, 95% of miners actually have to adopt it and vote for it. So there's different levels where things are activated. Yeah.
What qualifies someone as being a quote-unquote miner in an official sense to be voting in these sorts of systems?
Anyone can be a miner. So that's what's interesting. I mean, you could go out and buy a mining rig. You can even mine on your computer. It is at the point where you need ASIC chips that are specifically designed to actually kind of make a dent, because it is a total mining hash rate. So it's if you were to have a tiny little computer mining, the chance of you finding a block would be 1 in quadrillion. It would never happen. So in order for your vote to count significantly, you'd have to invest a ton of money into the mining hardware. So anyone can vote, anyone can download this Bitcoin Core and start mining, but it is kind of democratic. It is the majority. So I would say to hit that 55% rate, it would probably be tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars in hardware that you would have to buy.
The actual way that voting works is actually kind of cool. When I first learned about it, I thought I was wondering the same question, how do you, if anyone just mines, does everyone have equal vote? How does that work? We'll go into it a little bit during the mining lecture, but I can just give a quick rundown of how it works. Remember how I said there's an area called op return where you can put a piece of text. Basically, what they'll do is the network will say that, hey, the next 1,000 blocks are designed for voting. And the op returns are designated for the purposes of voting. And so the idea is, if you have more hash power, right, more mining capabilities, you're more likely to get a block. And so it's almost like a random sample of people so it's not like every miner actually ends up voting. It's you get a random sample of people that vote, and then they look at those 1,000 blocks to see which one had more. But when you have let's say you do have about 5% of the computing power in the network, then that means roughly in the next 1,000 blocks you'll get about 50 of those blocks that you're the one who got a vote on. Pretty cool idea.
Nice. Solid. All right. So like I said, it's a $15 billion. Oh, do you have a question?
I guess I was just gonna ask so I still don't fully understand how it works, but I was curious why is it a random sample versus the people who invested the most money and have
So it's not a random sample. It's basically like you were saying, it is kind of a random sample in the sense that it is random in who gets a block. But it also is kind of weighted, just basic statistics. If you have 5% of the mining power, you should get 5% of the blocks. But it could range, technically there's an extremely small chance that they could get 100% of the 1,000 blocks, but it tends to kind of even out. And so basically that's why it does a 1,000 block sample, is because it wants to kind of get a statistical average of how many people are actually supporting it.
Not a random sample, it's almost a weighted random sample.
Okay.
Yeah. And then so I was talking about, it has a $15 billion market cap. So with something significant like that, it's the size of a pretty decent company. They want to be very conservative with change. So they really want to avoid this major change in hard forks. They really want to focus on these incremental solutions like Lightning or off-chain scaling or segregated witness, which we'll get into a little bit later. They really focus on Bitcoin stability and kind of let the alternate coins with lower market caps and less to risk do the experimentation and adopt things that are wildly successful or that they think would improve the protocol without making too many waves. But this really has created kind of a divided community. Gavin Andresen, the individual who was actually handed the code over directly from Satoshi when he left the community, so he's kind of the second in command. He's extremely involved. You might have noticed him on the third individual with the most commits toward Bitcoin Core. He actually left and started Bitcoin XT. The block size was like 1 megabyte. That in 2010 they constrained it to like, for a lot of reasons. I'm not going to go into all the specifics, but he basically wanted to change that to 8 megabytes immediately. Because there's this huge scaling debate. Mike Hearn, Jeff Garzik are other examples, Roger Ver of individuals who want immediate scaling. They want to change the block size. But in order to do that, you have to hard fork. And they're really concerned in hard forking because like Ethereum hard forked. And half the net, like I would say 70, 80, 90% of the network went with it, but then you have that 10% that doesn't. And it was actually detrimental to the currency. They actually lost money. So they just really don't want to hard fork. They want to have a soft fork solution. Yeah, but like that's kind of a good, like we're kind of running out of time, so I can skip over a lot of that.
I just wanted to throw these names at you just to like, these are some major names that you will be seeing throughout the course. Because like, yes, it's a decentralized system, but some people do have a lot more influence than others. Yeah, that's essentially what we wanted to get across by this.
Scaling debate's extremely interesting and extremely volatile. I'd love to talk about after class if you have time, but basically with this slide, the gist of it is that you have people who are hardcore libertarians, people who are kind of political extremists who truly believe in this for like just more than kind of economic reasons for political or maybe like deep-studied beliefs. It's extremely hard to get people to agree. You have this gigantic community from all different walks of life, and getting everyone to agree on how to scale it or what it actually should be. Some people want it, like a way to circumvent capital control. Some people want it a way to kind of stick it to the man. Other people want to just like adopt it and become the next PayPal. So getting everyone to agree is going to be very difficult, and that's kind of what's at the heart of this kind of scaling debate, what Bitcoin should truly be. And it'll be really interesting to see, because it is kind of the truly the first decentralized kind of ecosystems that's been created. And it is really like a kind of an experiment still at this point to see if it'll be successful and to see if it can fix the scaling debate, if it can kind of in a decentralized way come to agreement. So it should be interesting to see how it progresses.
Creating governance through libertarian ideals is very hard.
Yeah, extremely hard.
It's kind of oxymoronic.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, all this information we're going to put on the decal, all the lecture slides. So if you want to look over it a little bit more, there is going to be homework. There's some required readings. It's just really short stuff though. Like a brief introduction to Bitcoin. Hopefully that should clear some things up. As well as like kind of a Bitcoin developer guide that goes into a little more in depth. Some of the things not quite as in deep as we're going to be going over them. There's some extra readings which I think are really interesting. That Willie report is going to talk about kind of some of that fractional reserve with the whole Mt. Gox hack, some kind of like a alternate perspective of what they think happened. So you'd be interested in reading that. Digital Gold, it's about Marty, who was a really shy European who was terrible at coding, but ended up being kind of like very deeply involved with Satoshi and actually like helping him get the word out. And it was he's very integral in kind of getting the word spread about Bitcoin. And then Silk Road, it's about kind of the notorious online drug marketplace. It's always interesting reading about kind of that. It's more the dark side of Bitcoin, but it's very interesting to read.
Yeah, the homework's pretty easy. Just join the Piazza. You can probably do a search for it and find our course. If not, we'll be sending out an email later today with all this information, as well as instructions to join the Piazza. Optional readings are optional, but there'll be like extra question on if we do a quiz. Like there'll be always like one bonus question if you get from the optional readings. And also, if you haven't, make sure you do the attendance, because if you don't, we don't know you're here, and then we can't register you for the class.